Ruby Terrasas from the Ulysses Electric Co-op in Ulysses, Kansas. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is supported by Calix, who enables 86% of America's electric cooperatives to deliver residential, business, and community solutions that excite their members and will shape their growth for the futures. Learn more at calix.com/electric co-ops.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. More than 200 electric cooperatives have already built or have started work to offer broadband either on their own or through a partnership. Now, with tens of billions of dollars in federal and state money being allocated to bring high-speed internet to unserved and underserved areas, the number of co-ops entering broadband could potentially double in the years to come. As a co-op, what does it take to plan, build, and run a broadband business? And what resources are available to help? To answer that, we'll talk to Paul Breakman. He's NRECA's Vice President of Cooperative Business Solutions. We'll also hear from Craig Eccher, the former CEO of Tri-County REC in Pennsylvania and its Tri-County Connections subsidiary, one of the nation's first co-op-run broadband companies, and Bill Gerski, Vice President of Marketing and Sales at Beacon Broadband, a subsidiary of Coos-Curry Electric Cooperative in Oregon. Bill also worked with Craig in Pennsylvania as Tri-County Connections Business Development Vice President. Paul, Bill, Craig, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, why don't we start by getting sort of a lay of the land on where we are with rural broadband. I'm sure everybody who's listening has heard that there's a massive push at the state level, federal level, to close the so-called digital divide. But Paul, why don't you sort of walk us through what's going on with this funding and this sort of newfound political will to solve this issue?
Sure, Scott. First, it's important to note that out of our 900 or so cooperative members, we've got about 210 who have already deployed broadband on some level. And with the latest push from the federal government and the state governments to close and bridge that rural gap, I would expect that number to grow by another 150 co-ops over the next 36 or 48 months. And it's primarily related to those policy shifts where money's flowing out of Washington. If you look at this latest round related to this infrastructure funding passed last year, you're talking about $65 billion going towards rural broadband deployments. And the biggest program is what's called the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. It's $42.5 billion flowing from Washington to expand high-speed internet, and it's going to flow through the states. And so I would expect to see that money start flowing probably not until 2024 at this point. Thought originally sometime in 2023, but we're probably talking 2024. With that said, it's nice that we're finally seeing a real push coming out of Washington. We've talked about it for years. If we don't get it right, if we don't get this, this mapping effort right, we don't get the allocation right, there's we will never see this amount of money flowing from DC for rural broadband in our lifetime.
That's great. And I do want to get a little bit more, before I bring Craig and Bill in, I want to get into why is it that the co-ops seem to be front and center for, there's a lot of federal lawmakers who are really thinking exclusively about co-ops as solving this problem. What's causing that dynamic?
First and foremost is accountability, right? So electric co-ops have been and continue to be accountable to their communities and to spending of the dollars that have flowed to those communities. And so I think when the government looks at who are the right partners, they look to the co-ops. And we can talk about it a little bit later, but it may not actually be the co-op that deploys. It may be some kind of partnership. But in terms of trusted advisors within communities, it's the co-op is number one. And considering we are 56% of the landmass, and most of that is unserved or underserved in terms of internet speeds.
Great. Okay, so I want to sort of chunk this interview up in three main parts. One, I want to look at the idea of the decision, getting to the decision of doing a broadband project. And then after that, what it looks like to build out the project, what some of the challenges are there, and then the actual running of a broadband subsidiary. So Bill and Craig, you guys are super experienced at that, all three of those bits. Can you talk about some of the big hurdles at the beginning before you actually make the decision to go? The idea of getting board buy-in, how does it pencil out in terms of density and in terms of revenue? Walk us through that, and you guys can decide which of you wants to take that question first.
Hey, Bill, I'll take the first shot at this.
Okay.
Scott, it's a great question because it is an elephant in the room type of situation. In our case, we had members asking us, why don't you bring us broadband like you brought us electricity? Those would be questions posed to me at our annual meeting or even letters to me. And so we would hold strategic planning sessions every year or every other year sometimes. And then we brought this to the table with the board. And the board said, yeah, let's take a look at it. Because most of our broadband in our region, was DSL. So I would say this to any cooperative looking at doing this. First step is to run your feasibility study because you'll be able to get a look at a market analysis. What do you have out there really? I mean, we think there's not much, but you don't know until you really do an analysis. And then you get an idea of your cost because with low density, your cost can be higher, but you can find ways how to make that work too. And then finally, your financial forecasting is a big part of this. And then you can look at what you need to do to make it work. For example, grant funds. I mean, right now, members have a great opportunity with the grant funds that are out there to make this work financially. We had to struggle a little bit with that to figure that out. And then finally, the staffing in those feasibility studies, because you cannot do this with your own team. That's my opinion. I mean, you have to build on that. But I would say the feasibility study is the most important piece initially, and there's many consulting groups out there.
Great. What about you, Bill? What have you seen from your side of the equation?
Especially out here, I helped Craig back in Pennsylvania, and you're really looking at rural areas, 5.8 homes per mile, and mostly dairy farms and such as that out there. So the need is tremendous. And now with the leadership coming from the NRECA and some of the guys like Paul Breakman and some of those other people helping us being able to do all this and the money that's available, we're actually starting to see, and what I really like to see is there's a lot of competition out there. Saying goes right now is that a rising tide lifts all boats. So as these rural electric cooperatives are building out broadband, you're starting to see competition come from both, the charters of the world and the spectrums and some of the local areas. They're all saying, well, hey, here comes this electric cooperative building out broadband. Maybe we should upgrade our systems. And who's going to win from that? It's our members, the members of the cooperative that are going to be doing that. So some of the cooperatives, as they build out broadband, may not have to complete their whole system because of some of the things that are happening. So I think the electric cooperatives with their infrastructure are taking the lead on this. And we really believe this is a plus for the members, for the community, for economic development, and it's a win for everybody.
That's great. And before we get into the next couple of chunks, Paul, why don't I bring you in here? Because the things that are daunting to co-ops who have not gotten in are the idea that they may have to go this alone. They may not have the resources. Talk about some of the resources that are available, not only from NRECA, which Bill sort of hit on a little bit, but from all sources, from the federal government, state level. What's out there to sort of help co-ops to get to yes on this?
Craig alluded to it. Due diligence, right? It's important that you don't dive in without knowing what you're getting into. There's a number of things that co-ops need to look at. Apart from just the financing, you're talking about legal considerations, tax considerations, marketing considerations, business model considerations. And once you're up and running, what about operationally? What does your workforce look like? What does the ongoing operation and maintenance look like? NRECA has worked really hard to put together a number of resources. We recently rolled out our broadband tier for our members with a specific set of resources for the co-ops in the broadband space. And we have excellent associate member partners, including folks like NRTC and Vantage Point, to name a couple. Just our relationships are the core of our success in this space.
Yeah, that's such a great point. We do have a resource here that almost nobody else who's getting into this market would have, and that's the experience of our peers. So before we move on, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other options, because in this podcast, we're talking about actually building a subsidiary, but there are other options out there. Could you sort of quickly go through what other options are out there for co-ops who want to bring broadband to their members, but may not be ready to go all the way in with a subsidiary?
The partnership model is hugely important here, and I think that's what you're alluding to. There is no right way. We've seen electric co-ops partnering with telephone co-ops. We've seen electric co-ops partnering with investor-owned utilities. There's a good model in Virginia, in fact. We've seen electric co-ops partnering with vendors to get this done. It's just what's going to work in that community, and we say it all the time. You've met one co-op, and you met one co-op. Craig's co-op in Pennsylvania did it a very specific way. Bill's co-op out west is doing doing it a particular way. There's various business models, and I don't want to understate the fact that you have to pay attention to state laws, what you're allowed to do as a co-op, and what's going to work in terms of your business model. But to your point about, if you don't want to go all the way, there's the idea of building middle mile and leasing out that last mile. There can get into the details, and I would bore you for the next 3 hours. Just know that the solutions are many, right? And the goal is all the same. We want to bridge the gap. We want rural America to have a robust telecommunications system and access. And any way we can get there is the right way.
Awesome. Craig, did you have something you want to add there?
I was just going to follow up with that, Scott, real quick. Initially, we actually looked at a partnership. And so we were working with a cable company and we were working with a telephone company. Actually, it led to almost trying to acquire the telephone company. We were in the acquisition mode on that, but we just couldn't quite make it work. And I think the problem was they really didn't know much about cooperatives, but a lot of that has changed. So I think there is a lot of opportunities out there for partnerships.
That's a great point. Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll talk about the challenges of building out and running a broadband network.
Communities across this country have relied on co-ops to bring the services their communities have depended on for the last 85 years. And now they're stepping up in historic numbers to close the digital divide and create more access to education, medical care, and employment opportunities. Are you ready to deliver exceptional broadband experiences to your members and ensure a thriving community for the next 85 years? Calix is proud to support the NRECA and the mission of all co-ops to improve the quality of life for their members. Learn more at calix.com/electric co-ops.
Hi, I'm Shelby Cloud from Colquitt EMC in Moultrie, Georgia, and you're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. All right, so let's look at the next chunk in our progression here, and that's the actual build out. There's got to be 1,000 different things that co-ops have to sort of be aware of and good advice and best practices. Bill and Craig, if you could sort of walk us through some of the high points that you had to deal with and have considered in the actual build out, whether that's the financing at the beginning, the make ready work. Paul mentioned the marketing side of it, actually getting the word out, which is not something that co-op are used to having to do. Talk us through that.
Well, the first thing that we had to deal with was the right-of-way issue, legal issue. And we had to get a law changed in Pennsylvania just to take some risk off the table. That was number one. And then the make ready, I would say, is probably the next challenge. Many times we underestimate how much make ready we need. Depends on the age of the plant, but it's not something you can't get over. The benefit is you have a brand new plant when you're done. But the third piece, and I'm going to hand this off to Bill, is that the one thing we're not good at, and we really don't do, we're monopolies. We don't do sales and marketing. We're electric companies. That's why you need to hire a guy like Bill.
What do you say, Bill?
To roll this out, Scott, you really start to look at what are the challenges that you're going to face. And as you know about rural America, your key challenges are senior citizens. You've got a huge bulk of senior citizens. You've got a huge bulk of seasonals, and especially in those rural areas. And then you still have the competition. So we came up with programs to conquer each one of those areas. Seniors, we created the Senior to Senior program that the NRECA is very well aware of, and you continue to learn more about that. And that's using seniors in high school to teach the seniors how to use computers. You have to come up with new rates for the seasonals. But then at the end of the day, what are all the key opportunities that existed because of that? And that was economic development. Because of COVID, people had to work from home. Education for teachers and instructors, and then doctors being able to do telehealth.
One thing I'll leave you with, Scott, too, just that out of the Bills. From a CEO with an engineering background, the one thing I can't help but say is that you're building the foundation to launch your smart grid. And, the only thing in my mind is lowering outage hours. So from a cooperative standpoint, this is huge to have that infrastructure to be able to launch that smart grid.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's something that sort of gets overlooked in this, that in order to run this fiber to your membership, this communications infrastructure that you're building is absolutely invaluable to improving your system. Was that sort of the first way in for you, Craig, when you were talking to your board and talking to your staff? It's like, this is going to improve reliability, it's going to improve our visibility into our system.
Well, it was definitely, a component with the board of directors. Because, being a large system, it was 3,000 miles of system we had over about 5,000 square mile territory. We're in a mountainous part of Pennsylvania. You have a lot of outage hours. So how do we continue to reduce that? This is one of the ways. We had been launching smart grid for a while, but now the next generation of AMI, automated meters, can go on this backbone. Putting intelligent devices out in the field to minimize the amount of territory that's out of power when an outage occurs, and being able to more accurately pinpoint where that outage is to save wear and tear on your linemen when they go out to repair it and more quickly restore the outage. I got to tell you, I mean, from a membership standpoint, it's huge. And you would be hard-pressed to do this without this kind of fiber backbone. I mean, wireless in many areas just doesn't work that way. So yes, it was.
Here, we have 23 substations, and we're seeing more and more, I hate to use the word terroristic acts with substations. However, the ability to have fiber to those substations to let them communicate and to provide security systems with cameras, with night vision, is huge for us to be able to look at those substations and monitor those. So that's one of the key things, is being able to have fiber and let those substations communicate with each other and make the grid smarter.
That's great.
So I need to jump in here, Scott, because I want to emphasize that Bill's singing the praises, and it's a great business when it's working. But the need for due diligence of any telecom investment by a co-op is important, right? So we're talking about major technology upgrades, expansion of broadband coverage. It comes with significant, and sometimes unprecedented challenges, right? As I think Craig can tell you. And the business case and cost recovery mechanisms for that last mile deployment are a lot different when you compare it to on the operations side. That it's just a different thing. And when you're going from the meter now into the home, right? We've never been into the homes before. We're now into the homes. And your intersection with the customer, the consumer member, is different as well, right? So it's a culturally different thing in addition to just a different business model as well from what we're used to. Bill, you want to expand on how this relationship has changed?
It's tremendous change. Now we're in the household, and now they're actually, other than seeing a lot of the linemen up on the poles fixing up their things, we're actually in the household. And out here, we call it the white glove treatment. So we have 2 drops. You got the drop from the pole to the house, but then you have the internal installation. And out here, we're providing not just internet, we're providing video, we're providing phone, and we're providing security. Now the electric cooperative is in the technology business inside the home, not just outside the home. And that's a game changer for the electric cooperative.
I want to get into the post-build and actually running the new broadband subsidiary. Paul, you mentioned the due diligence, and I just wanted to press you on that a little bit because I think you set up this idea that these are things you have to think about, but talk a little bit about the resources the co-ops have at their disposal with NRECA and maybe some of the statewide as well to help them make sure they're checking the right boxes before they start the build-out or before they even start the conversation.
Well, the first step in my mind is, why does this broadband investment make sense for the co-op and its members? And that starts at the cooperative level, with the staff and working with the board and what the right model looks like. When you go from there, you start thinking about what technology choices and what level of investment are appropriate. And that's a place where NRECA can really help, getting the right technology partners, finding the right funding options or funding potential models, and also federal funding opportunities. And the next question really is, how is that investment opportunity going to be pursued? You know, as we mentioned, is it going to be a partnership with your local telco, your ISP? Can the cooperative lawfully pursue this investment? Those things you're going to want to work with your local attorneys on, those legal questions, and your local business partners, you know, as I mentioned, your board in terms of the right decisions. And then the senior leader at the co-op gets to make those business calls. And then from there, and this is where the regulatory considerations and the legal considerations going forward. So NRECA has a number of resources. We help the co-ops not only deploy, but to stay in business.
Awesome. Okay, so next chunk, we've decided to do the project. We've actually built it out, or at least started building it out. In order to support the customers that we now have from this build out, we have to create a new business. We're running a new subsidiary. Bill and Craig, talk a little bit about the cultural issues, the staffing issues, some of these really big, important entry-level issues to creating a new company.
Well, I think the most important thing you really need to consider is that staffing of the company. And I think there's a couple of key components there. One is a technology person, a chief information officer, because even though we may have really good engineers in our organization, we really don't have people that specialize in that area. And there's a lot of good consultants you're going to work with, but it's really a good idea to have somebody in-house that has that background. And then the other side, we just don't do sales and marketing. So bringing somebody in that's seasoned, that can really build a sales and marketing team for you, I think is critical. And then you have to realize, and Bill brought it up there, is that there is going to be some cultural issues within the organization at that point. And you just got to know that going into it. And it's not a bad thing. It's going to happen. But in the end, what comes out of that is good for the overall organization. I mean, we're doing some really great things in the customer care department now that we would not have if we hadn't merged that competitive entity into the organization. And let me be clear, they're 2 separate organizations, but do share employees with the model we work with. Bill, go ahead.
One of the things I was able to do here is really work closely with the Coos-Curry Electric Cooperative out here and really work with their member services department. And one of the things I like to do when I first get into an area is I need to meet all the community leaders. So I've gone out and meet all the county commissioners, all the mayors, the Chamber of Commerce, and I do presentations to all these groups. I'm meeting tomorrow with the city council. So not only that, I'm taking the member services manager from the electric co-op along with me. And now between the two of us, we have recognition. I have the full backing of 83 years of trust and integrity of the electric cooperative, which allows me to get into the door being the broadband provider. So when I go into a door and say I'm Beacon Broadband, however, I don't say that first. I say I'm powered by Coos-Curry Electric. I am Beacon Broadband. I have that recognition and trust when I walk into any door.
Great. All right, before I let you guys go, I want to get a little philosophical about why it's important to do this, because we think about, broadband, you got Netflix, you can do your Amazon, stuff like that, but there are much bigger things at play, not only for the community, but for the co-op as well. Sort of talk about why this is important beyond just the connectivity. What does it do for the community?
Well, I'll start it. I think it's future-proof. That fiber that's going in the ground is valued at about 50 to 70 years of future-proofing our network and our communities. When you're putting that fiber in there, think about this. Cable only lasts 15 to 20 years, and most telephone things last 15, 20 years. The fiber we're putting in there will last 50 to 70 years, and it's upgradable. So we are building a long-term relationship with the entire community for not just education, working from home, economic development, but healthcare down the road. So think about this. What we are doing is for the next 50 to 70 years. It's for our children and our grandchildren. I think that's why it's such an important endeavor. And being able, as Paul says, to grab some government money while it's available, there's no better time to get into this business and get this rolled out and help our members.
Our members as an electric provider basically take you for granted. We've come a long way. It's a reliable product. It's just expected. But now we're giving them something that's made the company more relevant. It's just a great rapport that we have with our member now. And it's a great two-way street, and it's something that we probably could not have done without giving them something that they couldn't get from somebody else.
All right, Paul, what do you think? Why is this such a big thing for co-ops and our communities?
I sing the praises of what electric co-ops do in their communities every day. And we started in the electric business 75 or 80 years at this point. And it's not because we love the commodity of electricity, right? It's because we wanted to serve those communities. And electricity was the way we were helping our communities because the investor-owned utilities would not come to rural America. And here we go again, right? It's happening. It's repeating itself. The importance of us being, not necessarily the provider, but the partner of broadband services in your community, whatever that looks like, is super important.
Great. This has been incredibly educational and illuminating. Honestly, you guys are just overflowing with knowledge and experience, and I want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing it with our listeners.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, Calix. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Sam Taggart from Poudre Valley REA in Fort Collins, Colorado. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.